Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This weekend marked 60 years since the March on Washington. It was August 28, 1963, when nearly 300,000 people, a multi-generational, multiracial, and multi-class movement of people gathered in support of jobs and justice. It was the height of the fight for civil rights. It was the first of its kind in DC, and it became one of the most historic and pivotal moments in American history. Today, we commemorate this march, looking back on the day to realize and understand it and its significance from the perspective of those who were there on the National Mall that summer day. We have four West Virginians, Reverend Ronald English, Ms. Betty Rivard, Mr. Gibbs Kinderman, and Mr. Al Anderson, to share their real lived experiences from that moment. Each will have 5 minutes to educate us. It's a short time, I know. I know they have lots of stories that they could tell us, but we want to ensure that there is time for follow-up questions and from me, the moderator, Kathy Ferguson, and then also too from our audience that is watching remotely and virtually. The first person I'd like to introduce to you today is Reverend Ronald English. He is a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and he came to West Virginia in 1972 to shepherd and preside over First Baptist Church in Charleston, West Virginia. He currently serves as the president of the Charleston chapter of the NAACP. You see him everywhere. He's always on the front lines fighting very good fights and leading folks in prayer. Thank God for him. Let's give him our full attention as we listen to his story and his reflections from his time at the March on Washington. Reverend English, would you unmute, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity of participating in this discussion, particularly with people that I have really learned to respect and honor for their work. Reflections on the March, one of my most favorite ones is how, as we were on the way there, a friend of mine, Reverend Albert Brinson, who was a minister in tutelage, as I was at Ebenezer, under Dr. King and Dr. King Sr. We drove up to the March, and we were driving at night in order to get there by morning. And we went through town, Lynchburg, Virginia. And it was about 12 o'clock at night. And we discovered that as we went through Lynchburg, that at the heart of town in Lynchburg was a noose, which was a sign of intimidation for anyone going to the march to remind them of the lynching legacy in America. But it was not something that really intimidated at that time, because it was really more something that really fired up people for understanding why we had to be there and what the impact and the expectations were. And then part of the march that is most commemorated is Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, which I have in more recent times talked about how that dream speech has been accommodated and has misused and abused in terms of how it has been utilized. But aside from that, the moment of the gathering and the feeling of the gathering and the position that I and my friend were able to get in really was close enough to the podium to see Dr. King. And not far from where we stood was Julian Bond, and that was some people that we were able to recognize as we were standing there in the mall. At the time of Dr. King's speech, the momentum had really risen. And one of the things we found out later, and part of what has been made known, is that he was really asked to put that speech earlier, but someone said that he needs to climax it. And it was the most important climax that really propelled that speech to the impact that it has had. One quick comment, though. I think that the impact of the speech made its impact at its time, but it has been misused and abused in such ways that I have had the opportunity of reminding folks that he said himself before he died that his dream had become a nightmare. And that was when he was dealing with what he was leading into for the Poor People's Campaign. So the circumstances around which he later said what his dream was and how it had been really misused and abused had caused him to say his dream had become a nightmare. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we understand how the range of his motion and impact and the maturity as well as the agony that came out of what he was doing and what he was seeing and the work that was yet to be done was something that really kind of mixes the motions and really gives us a authentic insight in terms of what that day meant, what his dream meant, what his life meant, and how the integrity of his life was consistent with the intent that he died for.
Reverend English, in our pre-interview, you mentioned two things that I think I'd like you to highlight for our audience. You mentioned the fervor and the force of the day, as well as the soul force from the women. Would you care to elaborate about that feeling and that sense of what was happening on the mall that day?
Yeah, the soul force was almost like a religious experience. As we have had those kinds of experiences and the evidence of that in Black churches in terms of the only thing that might have been missing was the central focus on someone shouting, but it was like a collective shout. It was like a collective amen. It was like a joy that was so much in the nerve center of what caused us to be there and the kind of energy that it produced and the kind of collective soul force that was really shared by everyone there. And so looking into the eyes and looking into and just watching the way the folk walked in terms of that moment, that was a sense of dignity, that was a spur in the time, that was a shift in the walk, that was those kinds of things that could be felt collectively. And that was what was so most amazing about it. We knew that they would come from different places and different motives, but that was a collective soul force motive in that moment that I think really jarred and stirred and evoked the kind of presence that was expected, but was really exceeded all expectations of what that march would achieve and how that moment would feel and how it would resonate from that time on to all of us that were there.
Wow, thank you so much, Reverend English. We appreciate your sharing your story with us. Again, I know there's a lot more that you can say, but we're going to pause you for right now, and we're going to move to our next panelist, which is Betty Rivard. Originally from Detroit, she came to West Virginia by way of California. She has a storied career in social services and legislative work here in West Virginia. I'm sure many of you all have read her op-eds. She's quite the contributor to the Charleston Gazette in Kanawha County here with regard to issues that impact West Virginians. She's a very vocal citizen advocate, and we're pleased to have her here to share her experiences and her recollections as to what happened on the National Mall on that summer day. Betty, would you please share a little bit about how you got to the march, how you came to be there, the feeling that you had, and just your general thoughts and reflections about the day?
Thank you, Kathy. I grew up in Detroit until through grade school. In the middle of 7th grade, I moved to San Francisco. And in Detroit, I was in a homogeneous white neighborhood that was about half Christian, half Jewish, and partly Catholic. And the only experience I had with minorities was a woman who came to help my mother once a week to do some things that she didn't want to do, and had come since I was born, and was a very revered figure to me, a great person. And when I went to San Francisco, I was placed into a class. Our classes were tracked. It was a diverse junior high school. And the first Black student showed up at the third level class. And then the rest of the classes all down through the ninth level were primarily minority and low-income white kids. And I just, I couldn't grasp how unfair that was, especially when I was in gym class with Black girls who are obviously as qualified as I was, or more qualified. So fast forward, I went to a diverse high school that was primarily with not a large Black population, mostly Asian Americans, and embraced diversity at that point and made that a core value in my life. I went to University of California at Berkeley for a semester, and then went to Barnard College in New York for a year, and worked that summer. And and my family moved to Morgantown, West Virginia. So I needed to travel from New York to Morgantown, and I wanted to go to the March on Washington to show my support and to participate. So I caught a ride to DC. My parents arranged for me to stay with family there, who were high up in the Kennedy administration. The wife and two of the sons and I walked over from their house in Georgetown and participated in the march. We were fairly early, so we ended up in a good place under the trees to the right of the memorial, facing the memorial. We passed buses that were from all over the country, and saw the people coming out of the buses. I was much more attuned to what Reverend English decided as the soul force than I was to the speeches and the content of the speeches. And I ended up, the group that I was with decided that it was getting too hot, and we left before Dr. King's speech and went back to their house. It was close enough, and watched it on television. So even though I had the great experience of being a part of the march, I missed what has become the most famous feature of that march. But I just want to mention a couple of things. I think one of the big impressions for me was that people were standing tall, and that the values that I had, what I believed about our country at gut level, and I was a student of political science, I was very geared toward that, was there. I was experiencing it in real life. The organizers of the march created a space where that was okay. We shared a moral purpose, and all of the speakers reflected that. And there was music, and NPR. I just stumbled across a program NPR did on Saturday about the music of the march, and two of the principal performers were people that were part of my life. And one was Mahalia Jackson, who had a crossover hit. He's got the whole world in his hands, which was an incredible message to me as a young person. I mean, I was 18. It's a long time ago. But the other person who was there, and I don't remember hearing her, but I know now that she was there, and that was Joan Baez, and Pete Seeger. I should mention Pete Seeger. when I was 12 and babysitting for a family, and the little boys who were asleep, they would have me babysit during their naps. I would play records, and one of them was Pete Seeger, another was Odetta. In high school, Joan Baez was an incredible figure to me. It meant a lot in my life. And then later, Bob Dylan, who was there, but I didn't know about him then. So it was very intimate in that sense, even beyond all of the other public part of it. And I just want to reflect, if I have one more minute, that this was in my lifetime a model for the nonviolent actions of women, the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, the elderly. At one point we had Gray Panthers. And now we have spaces like this everywhere. And I think what really demonstrated that to me was during the protests over the murder of George Floyd, when even very small towns had marches where people came out. And we also have this, a lot of my colleagues, think that we sort of worked in vain because the same dynamics are coming back again. But we have this diversity every day here in Charleston. And it's not just local people, it's people coming in from all over and from neighboring counties that are quite rural. And I especially appreciate seeing it at the ballpark, at festival, at Multifest, at the Pride events. We obviously have a lot of work to do, but I think that there's a saying, that the ceiling raises, the floor raises and the ceiling raises. And after the March on Washington, in my opinion, the floor raised. And I was, I'm going to get emotional. It was just incredible to be a part of that and be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, for your impassioned story. I can see the tears in your eyes. We appreciate that. Thank you so much. Very touching. Our next speaker and panelist is going to be Mr. Gibbs Kinderman. And he, like Betty and Reverend English, is not originally from West Virginia. He is from the West Coast. He spent some time, he was from Oregon in the Washington area, but he came to the East Coast post high school and attended Harvard College to study political science. He had been working in DC, and that's how he got to the march. And I'll let him share all those little details about that. They're very interesting. But his time in West Virginia his work has largely been around air quality issues, and he's got touch points with the labor movements here in West Virginia. He's been a very strong advocate in terms of labor and worker rights. And more recently, he has been running or an owner of a radio station in his town. So I'm going to pass it to Mr. Kinderman to share his experiences on the day. Mr. Kinderman?
Thank you. I was in DC that summer as a college kid interning in the lobbying office of the Public Health Service. I too, like Betty, was a political science major, but I had not been involved in any kind of reform political movements at all. I was just, I guess I was a liberal, but I wasn't a passive liberal. And the federal government gave all the workers that day off because they were afraid there'd be huge traffic snarl-ups. And I was living with two other boys at DuPont Circle, exciting place in those days. And I said, well, this sounds like it might be interesting. I think I'll just walk down there. So I walked down Connecticut Avenue and got to the mall and I just couldn't believe how many people were there and the energy and the crowd, you know, lots and lots of Negro people, lots of white people, and everybody in an upbeat mood, and the spirit was just unbelievable. And so for me, it was a first. I'd never, well, I guess no one had ever been in an event that big before, but it was just a total mind blow for me, and really made me feel like I might want to become part of something bigger, and that this was probably it. And as Betty said, the music was amazing. The speeches were great. The energy in the crowd. It was just an unexpected blessing. I went curious and I went away excited. And that one day experience opened my mind up, and later on led to me being involved in other civil rights activities, like being part of the Mississippi Summer in 1964 and going to Selma in 1965, and other, life experiences after that that were involved with trying to help create a more just and a more equal society in America. But this was my introduction, and it was life-changing.
I did want to just ask you briefly, in terms of your inclination to go there. Certainly, there have been some tumultuous times that had happened before that, before the march. We had the bombings in Birmingham, and we had the arrest of Martin Luther King and being jailed, and just so many people that had been abused during the marches in Selma and other places. Were you concerned at all that there might be any violence at the March on Washington? Did that give you any pause, or did you just go straight in? And can you share some information about that?
I was 20 years old. I was up for anything. I wanted to see what was going on. I don't recall having any trepidation about something bad happening. I was just hoping something interesting was happening, and it sure was.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I have a follow-up question with you later on the second round, but we're going to pass it to Mr. Al Anderson. And Mr. Anderson comes from Osage, West Virginia. So he actually is a person that was born and largely raised in our state. And he actually moved out of the area. He went to the West Coast and spent some time out that way, and then ended up in DC for quite some time. He has since been back in West Virginia, and he has a career in shoe repair and management on many levels. But I think his biggest claim to fame, and many of you all may be aware of him and know him from his musicianship. He is known far and wide across West Virginia, singing both for private events and public events. He's highly sought after for his melodic voice and the offerings he gives in terms of gospel renditions and music, as well as secular classics. So I'm going to have Mr. Anderson share his experience from his time at the March on Washington. Mr. Anderson, we'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And just listening to all the others, I reflect a whole lot of that. And I managed a retail store on Connecticut Avenue called the Bootery. And that was right on Connecticut Avenue. So when the man said he walked down Connecticut Avenue, that's exactly what I did. And although I managed the store, and I did have 4 other workers that worked in the store, we had a cashier, so they didn't miss me because I was the manager of the store. And I was not going to miss that anyway. So when I went down there, just like many others, you don't know exactly what to expect. But after I got there and I watched all the people, it was kind of like a love fest. You couldn't find anybody that had a problem with somebody next to them. It would seem like everybody was just like a serene situation. And I don't remember much about any of the music, even though I'm a music person. I didn't remember much about the music or the march, because when they was talking about the march, I said, even if they marched afterwards, I had to march my butt back up on that hill and go to the store that I was managing. And that store was, I was the only person of my persuasion was in that store, and I'm the manager. So walking up that hill, and not only did that revive my whole life situation, because when you're in those situations sometime on Connecticut Avenue, because there wasn't a whole lot of blacks that were 1963 that worked on Connecticut Avenue. You may have did some different kind of jobs, but being in the management and things like that, you didn't see very much of that in DC. But when I saw all of those buses there, and I saw all the people, and I don't remember much of the speeches, but I do remember Dr. Martin Luther King, when he spoke, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one that had that touched you all the rest of your life. And as I got back here in West Virginia, it just, and I don't know if a lot of people, as you say, that know me, not only with the music and the shoes, and I'm one probably like in this museum that we have here that has all the history of Osage, a lot of folks don't know about, but just being away from there, I carried that all of my life. And I was going to show just a little bit of after I got back to West Virginia, the being on all those different boards and things, if anybody can kind of see, there's a Dr. Martin Luther King Award. And this is an award for managing a Scotland Public Service, a sewer project. And this is being a Citizen of the Year. And this is another award that I can't even see that too good right now. But many of these awards that came to me because out of Dr. Martin Luther King, everything that stuck with me, when I came back home here, it just gave me all the strength of doing and treating people, whether it was doing the gospel music or my old time rock and roll. And I've been doing that music for 64 years. And I still do it right now. And I sing everywhere. But that day, as I was walking up that hill, it gave me a whole different rejuvenation of even being a manager of that store. Because
Mr. Anderson, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you've been muted for the last 10, 15 seconds or so.
I
okay.
think you hit that, so don't.
I must have hit that. But it was such a serene situation, and almost anybody that came away from there that changed their lives, and it changed my life. I was 26 years old, and that was actually 60 years ago. So I'm 86 years old right now, and like even my shop, I've been there for 40 some years. I've been doing music for 64 years. And people say, man, is that guy still there at that shop? Yeah, see, because I got the energy to do. And I got a lot of that from Dr. King, just knowing how to treat people. And I'm on probably 10 different boards. I've been on the Settlement House board, been on the United Way board, been on, right now, I'm the chairperson of the Lions Club board at Westover. So many things that God gives me, the energy to go and do these many things and treat people. The one thing, out of all people around, everybody knows me here. And most of the places that I go sing, most of the places, I'm the only one in my persuasion in many places that I go to sing. But no matter what, you know, you have love in your heart and you do your job. And when Al's there, you're going to have a packed house. So I appreciate just being on here because it stuck with me. All of those years, that speech changed my whole life. And just walking up that hill, going back to that store, it was like a changed person when I got to that store. And someone just asked me in here a while ago, did you tell the other people in the store about your experience? I said, no, I didn't talk with nobody about that. But I just know that that was a life-changing thing and probably will never be a thing. And I remember, and I was telling someone that I think Dr. Martin Luther King knew that he wasn't going to be around a whole long time because that way that speech was like a speech of, I'm going home pretty soon. And, but he was a blessing and I try to be a blessing. And most people that know Al, you know, even in my shop, no matter what, people need this or need that, don't charge much money or anything, but I try to help people along the way. And it's been a blessing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anderson. I really appreciate your sincere testimony about your experiences that day. And I think it's interesting and it underscores the fact that, you know, there are sort of three universal languages that people have, and that is math and love and certainly music. Those are things that folks have in common and that we can forge relationships and community with one another, just with those simple things. So I appreciate your sentiments. I'd like to actually go to Reverend English, if I could, very briefly. And I think he may be on a phone call. So I will pause him for, wait, is he gonna, okay, he's off. So I'd like to circle back with Reverend English because Mr. Anderson, one of the things that you said there in closing was that you felt as though the message that Dr. Martin Luther King had that day was that he was not going to make it and that he would be seeing his final days in very soon. And I know that Reverend English, you had actually mentioned about in your reflections with me about the march, where you were positioned, where you could see where you were situated in proximity to the podium, and actually being able to hear or know that one of the singers that was up there asked him to tell about the dream. I'm going to let you actually do it in an eloquent way and really educate us about what happened at that moment and how that message, how his message took a bit of a different turn.
Yeah, I'll start with that, but I definitely want to go back to some of that somebody was saying about how the music in that moment was really so carefully crafted. And I kind of written about this, that when Dr. King got toward the end of the speech, Mahalia Jackson, who was not only a world famous gospel singer, but a very good friend of Dr. King, and often visited with her when he was in Detroit. Mahalia felt like the ending that may have been anticipated was not going to be sufficient enough. And some of the staff members even said that the speech was good, but they felt like for him to end with that refrain would have been overdoing it because it had been done so many times before. Y.T. Walker, who was his chief of staff, was a good friend of mine, and he said that, yeah, they just wanted to end up on something else. And it was when he was coming toward the end, and Mahalia felt that he was about to wind it up. She said, tell him about the dream, Mark. Tell him about the dream. That's because he had given that speech in Detroit, and she was in the audience in Detroit when he gave that speech. So that's why she already knew about the speech. And therefore, she felt she needed to inject that at that moment so that he would wind it up the way he did. And so that was part of the divine inspiration through the instrument of Mahalia Jackson that called Dr. King to shift in that last moment. But I want to say very, very quickly that and many have talked about how the music and those that participated was so magnificent, and in terms of those who participated, and the Harry Belafonte, who was a close personal friend to Dr. King, was responsible for getting those musicians there. He recruited them and then bound them together, and so Joan Baez and all of the others that were part of the music. But the reason I want to mention that really today is because the NAACP meeting was in Lewisburg this year, and the daughter of Harry Belafonte was there. Adrienne Belafonte Besmeyer has been in West Virginia for a number of years, and she was there because they wanted to give a special recognition and presentation to her for the work that her father had done, and how often he had been here because his daughter was here. I remember seeing him at the time that she graduated from West Virginia State College, and and I was with him close enough that I was planning on getting a picture taken with him. And I had a guy who was a camera, he was a technician and he was a teacher of that. And he's supposed to have taken the picture of Harry Belafonte and I as we were at the airport, and come to find out he didn't have any film in his camera. And so we missed that opportunity. But he drafted those singers there. And if it had not been for Harry Belafonte, those singers would not likely have appeared in the order that they did, with the passion that they had, because it was so much a part of the nerve center of the entertainment that was provided that day, thanks to Harry Belafonte.
Thank you, Reverend English. I'd like to, go to Ms. Rivard. And, everybody on the panel were, in their 20s around this time, impressionable, definitely have the energy, the legwork. And we know that young people are the future, right? So in terms of how we engage young people now, in terms of movements, in terms of participation in things, do you have any insights or thoughts or things that you can harken back to on that day as a way for us today to be able to connect with young people and involve them in movements to create change and create that change in the world that they want to see?
Thank you, Kathy, for that great question. I mean, it just hit me. I'm 78. It hit me that over 80% of people in the world are younger than I am. And I work around younger people a lot as volunteer. And I think there's two things that come to mind. And one is that as elders, sometimes we just have to get out of the way. And we have natural feelings of loss, grieving, wishing that we had done more, just fatigue, basic fatigue. Someone recently emailed me that they were just tired and they didn't want to fight a particular battle that I was trying to enlist them in. And that's natural. And I think the key is not to let that get in the way of what younger people need to do, because we need to be cheerleaders. And younger people need all the support they can get. And we're in a position to provide that. So it's not just getting out of the way, it's also actively cheerleading, offering suggestions without any weight that, that they're more important than anybody else's just because we're older. That's one whole area. The other thing is, I think we need to having said that, I think it's still important to share our perspectives. And right now I'm concerned, that we're getting caught up in ageism with relation to our current president. And when I look at, I know this is nonpartisan, but we're talking about the president of the United States. And I think we need to really look at the track record and look at who his vice president is, and really celebrate our accomplishments right now and build on those, whatever it takes to do that. And that's not a very popular opinion. I mean, I have been sharing that opinion, and I'm getting resistance even in my own, people closest to me. But from where I sit, the more I think about, the more I read, the more I look at things, there's a lot of divide and conquer going on. And I think we can, bring, at least offer, again, without any weight, but at least offer whatever wisdom we feel on this issue. Because we know that there are people like Al, who's, older than I am, who are still growing, still in there,
That's so true. That's so true. I'm going to pause you there because I do want to ask Mr. Kinderman a quick question, and then we have a participant, Mr. Holden, who'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to let our tech person work on that portion. But Mr. Kinderman, you mentioned that you were really impacted so much by what you experienced on that day, that it spurred you to take further action. And you mentioned, going down to Mississippi. Can you share a little bit about your motivations for feeling that you needed to do more or wanting to do more? Just briefly, if you could, please.
Well, a boy who was in our dorm at college had, in the same summer I was in DC, worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Mississippi and in voter registration. And he dropped out of school, but he came back for a visit about early December, I guess. And we were sitting around with him in the dining hall. And he was telling us what it was like in Mississippi. And we couldn't believe it. I mean, in America, how badly could people be treated? That shouldn't be. So some friends of mine and I who had been planning to spend our next summer bumming around the country like Jack Kerouac, I guess, we decided, well, we're going to go do what Claude's doing, and we'll spend our summer in Mississippi. So 4 of us decided to go, and we went to the training in Oxford, Ohio, Western College for Women. And we were in the second group. And the first morning, we were all told to gather together. And a lady got up and said that her husband and 2 of his co-workers disappeared the night before. And that was Shorter, Cheney, and Goodman, which really made the whole situation seem like less of an adventure and more like kind of going to nonviolent war. And they made an offer, the people that were running it, anybody that wants to leave, now's the time. I don't want to think any worse of you, but everybody stayed. And that was an incredible, powerful experience that summer in Mississippi. And after that summer was over, I was supposed to go to graduate school, but instead I went to work in Berea, Kentucky for a student volunteer organization called the Appalachian Volunteers. And we were hanging out in the Berea College Student Union the day after the Bloody Sunday in Selma. And one of the boys who was from Fairfield, Alabama, said, we should go down there. And I said, well, I got a car, I can drive us, but where would we stay? And he said, well, my aunt lives in Selma. So we all said, well, let's go. So 5 of us in a Volkswagen Bug went to Selma, and for the second march, which was the one that where the people turned back. But that was a really intense experience too. And out of that, Berea College, which had been started as the first integrated college in the South, and its motto was "God is made of one blood, all nations of men." And it kind of gotten away from that. But these boys who came back from Selma were insistent that Berea jump back in the fight. And that happened. The college administration did not back it, but students and alumni raised money and chartered a bus, and a whole busload of Berea kids went to Montgomery for the end of the march. And it had a big impact on the college. And I guess jumping back to what Betty was talking about, I don't think it's for us, the people in our 80s, even though she's just a kid at 78, it's not for us to tell the kids what's interesting or what's important or how they should do it. We just need to back them up. And if they ask us for our opinion, we should give it, but we shouldn't be trying to tell them what to do. John Lewis was one of the main speakers at the March on Washington. And he was basically getting up there as a 23-year-old and saying, you know, the Kennedy administration, what they're proposing is not half good enough. And you all older people and NAACP, you just need to get with the program. And he ran into a lot of opposition, but it was that energy from the younger people, SNCC, they called it. That's what really drove the thing. They didn't really accept Martin Luther King as the leader. They called him the Lord. They thought he was, you know, a good public representative, but he wasn't telling them what to do. And we shouldn't tell young people what to do either. It's their world. It's up to them to make those decisions.
I think that sounds like good advice there, Mr. Kinderman. We have somebody that joined us, Mr. Wes Holden, who wanted to give a brief statement and offer some commentary. So I'm going to go to him. I'm going to then ask Ron English one last thing, and I'm going to follow that up with Mr. Mr. Anderson, and then Ms. Alston for final remarks. So Mr. Holden.
Thank you very much, Kathy. 2 points I'd like to make. A lot of people are unaware of another important but sad, tragic event took place on this day 60 years ago. Emmett Till was murdered in Alabama. So a lot of people, you know, the March on Washington may overshadow that. But I also want to bring up a West Virginian, a very important West Virginian, who was very instrumental in making sure that the March on Washington was very successful. His name is Walter Reuther. He was born in Wheeling, West Virginia. He was president of the United Auto Workers. He, due to his love for wanting to have diversity and equal opportunities for everyone, the United Auto Workers formed rallies. They sent members on buses, airplanes, and trains, and the United Auto Workers paid for the buses, trains, and airplane trips for people to come to Washington on that day. Something else that no one is aware of, the United Auto Workers paid for the speakers all around the tidal pool, the reflecting pool, and the wiring. And it was a first-class job. And also, Walter Reuther was the only white person to speak at the March on Washington. So he was a very, very important part of the March on Washington. And he was a very close friend of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I'm sure the Reverend could make reference to that as well. Thank you, Kathy.
You're muted, Kathy.
Were you able to hear me?
I was. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Wes. I really appreciate those comments.
Thank you.
Helped to educate us way more. So thank you. I wanted to go back to Reverend English really quickly. There is a question that we have here in the chat that asks, how can we use Dr. King and others examples of nonviolent demonstrations today? But I also if you could answer that question. But I'd also like to get your last reflections in terms of where we were then and where we are 60 years from that point, in terms of the importance of that being a moment in history and in time. And today we have people trying to change history, rewrite it, revise it, erase it. And so if you could speak to those last two things, I'd really appreciate it.
You're
And
muted.
you have to unmute.
Thank you. The current events in terms of critical race theory and those issues that are related to the public education and what is being taught in schools, and particularly history, really reminds me of the textbook controversy that I participated in several years ago, when there were textbooks introduced and members of the Board of Education in Charleston did not want to have those books a part of the curriculum. And we went through the whole process of looking at the books, and it became the kind of thing that was focused to discard. Well, we won that, but now it's back, and it's in a different form, and it's also in a more pervasive form as far as how the books are being questioned, and how the literature that is a basic part of the American experience is being overlooked, as though we could not be who we are, where we are, had it not been for that part of our history. And you don't overlook the dark side, just to kind of focus on the light side. So I'm really watching, and as NAACP president, what happens as far as critical race theory and its effect in our education process. Things just keep popping to mind, Kathy, as you speak. And one of the things was that a lot of folks may not know that Rosa Parks kept her seat because she was secretary of the NAACP. But what caused her to keep her seat was when she remembered Emmett Till. And somebody mentioned that, and it just kind of brought it to mind. And his murder. And when the mother of Rosa Parks, of Emmett Till, decided to put that casket open, leave that casket open when people came by. And I remember I was selling Jet magazine as a kid, and I remember the Jet magazine was the first magazine that showed the image of Emmett Till in his casket and what the brutality of that beating looked like. That's what really started Rosa Parks and other folk to have a visceral response to what that image looked like. And because she decided to expose it, that was really one of the spark plugs as far as what really started this, the movement that Rosa Parks and Dr. King led. And so part of that is something that is needed to be noted and said, because the lynching of Emmett Till was really the beginning of the civil rights movement. I just forgot the other part of your question.
Well, it was a question from the audience, and it was, how can we use Dr. King and others examples of nonviolent demonstrations today?
Nonviolent demonstrations today that are taking place in terms of some specific causes are bringing into awareness not only what is needed now and what should be pointed to now, but how certain patterns of responding to it are still appropriate. And part of how we respond is from where our head and heart connect. And there's a lot of things that through media causes us to get confused and mixed motives and missed messages and that kind of thing. But where our head and heart can connect in terms of what we truly believe and where we are really coming from the deep within inside ourselves. So therefore, the part of what Dr. King relied on most was a spiritual grounding of his work, because it was always a part of his ministry. And part of what I have found is when we kind of get tap more roots into the spiritual grounding of whatever we are about, then it has a more substantive base for our participation and our commitment than just doing it because it seemed to be what needs to be done in the moment. And so the spiritual grounding and what the message of, and that was always part of what Dr. King, and it was part of contagious within those around him, and that gave such, offered such sacrifice of their lives and in that movement was because of the grounding of spirit. And I think that that's an open resource to us right now. And I know it continually gives me pause as well as a cause to look at what am I grounded in, as well as what we are working for, that helps us to answer the why we do what we do when we do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So this last question is going to go to Mr. Anderson. And it's not so much a question as it is a request. I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit because we know that he has a gift that he has shared with folks, and perhaps he could close us out a bit today. There is a song, This Little Light of Mine, that I feel captures the spirit of the day of the March in Washington. And those of you who are there, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps you can share with us what that song means to you, Mr. Anderson, and perhaps you would be so kind as to give us at least one verse and chorus of that as we get ready to close.
Okay. Well, I'm so thankful that you asked that, because all of my performances that I do, that's the song that I do. I tell a story of how God blessed me to sing for 64 years. And when I do those, I can't even see the audience out there because the stage is but the stage is lighted, but you can't see the folks out there. And when I talk with people after that, they say, Al, you know, everybody stood up when you sang that song. That's the last song I've sing for every performance. And I'd like to do just a little bit of it. Yeah, just a little bit of it. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All in the community, I'm gonna let it shine. All in the community, I'm gonna let it shine. All in the community, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. God gave it to me, I'm gonna let it shine. God gave it to me, I'm gonna let it shine. God gave it to me, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're just about to end, but I think that there is another question that came through. So hold on one second. Let's see. I don't see it. Maybe the tech person, can you highlight the question from, I believe you said it was from Pam. that you wanted to
Yeah,
add?
sure, Kathy. I just sent it to you in direct message. It says, this discussion is very inspiring. It shows that this movement is far from over. In light of what is happening now, where should we go from here?
Did anybody want to take that question? Oh, Betty, go ahead.
That happened to be the part of the last book that Dr. King wrote, Whether We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. And I think that's still the central question that is facing us in terms of where we go from here, how we envision where we go from here. And when he talked about chaos or community, he's talking about how the disruptive factors move us toward chaos and how those kinds of things that unite us move us toward community. And the bonding in community is what really is the source of a movement that helps us to resource each other in the process of how we find that common bond that blesses the time, blesses our energy, strengthens our energy for what we have committed to do.
Betty, you can answer too.
So what he said, plus I think it's a matter of bringing that down to the personal level and every day looking to see what can we do to make a difference. And I believe there is something every day that each of us can find that will be different for everybody, but that's just a principle that I suggest is worth looking at.
May I say one more thing before we go?
You certainly may.
We have our street fair here, September the 16th. We have it every year. And this year it's going to be it's very special because we have started what you call a community choir. And our young folks have been anywhere from like 7 or 8. And we have older folks like myself and all. And right now we have about 20. And most of those folks had never sang before, but we got them up there and they're all singing. And you're going to hear from me. I'll be singing a whole lot, not with the gospel only, with the mother rock and roll and things like that. And Aristotle Jones, who comes all around the state right now, he's going to be part of that. But September 16th, from around noon until dusk. So anybody can come there. You're going to have a good time. And we appreciate you just having, me on the program because it touches me that what Dr. Martin Luther King just walking from back up Connecticut Avenue, how much it came completely into my whole body. And that's why these 40 years since I've been back here in West Virginia, everybody uses my talent and all the other things that I deal with here in Montague County. And it's such a blessing. And I appreciate this day.
That's amazing. Thank you for that invitation. And along those same lines, wanted to let you all that are watching know, and those of you that are on the panel, if you happen to be in Charleston this afternoon, they are actually doing a dedication of the Martin Luther King mural. And it's actually on the side of the Martin Luther King Center on Donnelly Street there in Charleston, West Virginia. So that dedication is happening at 4:30 this afternoon. Again, that address is the Martin Luther King Center, Junior Center, and that's on 314 Donnelly Street in Charleston, West Virginia. So if you're able to make that, please make your way over to that as well. I'd just like to thank all of the participants. Thank you for carving out time today to share your experiences. I am hoping that this is something that makes it to the archives and that folks will be able to tap into as a resource for years and generations to come. What you all have shared has been very important and educational for all of us who come behind you. So thank you so much for that. I want to give a special thanks to our host for today's event. And I want to get this right. So let me look at the listing here of the hosts, the ACLU of West Virginia, Common Defense of West Virginia, the NAACP of Charleston, West Virginia, Our Future West Virginia, Rise Up West Virginia, West Virginia Citizen Action Group, West Virginia Citizens for Clean Elections and West Virginia Faith Table. So thanks to all of you who helped make today a reality. I have a finger up, so just really quickly.
Yeah, very quickly, when you mentioned NAACP, the membership is always open to the Charleston branch of the NAACP, and we have 3 members on this call already, and I see others. But we invite you to come on board with the Charleston branch NAACP. We are in process of making our transition into the new year and the other work that has been done. But what we are always open and hope that we get some new members to keep the movement alive. Thank you so much.
That was very important. And I think it goes without saying that probably for all of the hosting agencies, there is space to volunteer, to participate in some type of way. So you've got your pick of folks to involve yourself and give your time to. So please graciously consider working with any of the organizations that were mentioned. I'd also like to highlight Ms. Marian Alston. She is the curator of this. She and her partner in crime, as she might say, Cece Brown, who were very instrumental in making today happen. This is in large part a result of her vision and her tenacity and perseverance to get this done and make sure that these stories are heard and told, or told and heard. So I appreciate her very, very much. And on her behalf and on behalf of the hosting agencies, and I assume the panelists, we thank you all for coming today, and make sure you share the links with your friends and family. And this may be just the start of something that will continue throughout the year in years to come. So we'll see what Ms. Alston has on her agenda in terms of continuing these kinds of conversations. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm going to turn it over to our tech person to close us out officially.